Hello and welcome to another weekly devotion with Pastor Andrew. That's me. Boop boop. Okay. Had some good coffee today, and it is now toward the afternoon. So more coffee to go, and that afternoon jolt of energy as we get into this continuing mindset of Pentecost, and really as it's starting to slowly in church time wrap up, right? I've said that for quite a few weeks, but I said it again. So what makes this week unique is that we are celebrating, and I'm going to call it this tradition of Fifth Sunday coming up, right? We get different readings. The reading that we're going to hear today comes from the book of Numbers. We hear that and we go, oh, if we know anything, we go, oh, Numbers, that's kind of a boring book, but it also isn't. It is also not boring because these are when the people from the Exodus are pondering, what do we do? We've left Egypt, and though we were slaves there, as we hear a bit, I think in this reading, a bit of the rumblings, right? A bit of the sadness and grief, which is kind of bizarre to try and wrap our heads around in terms of the people wanting to be almost back in that situation of slavery. Why? Because things were secure and definite in that they knew that even though the food would be scarce, food would be there, even though it was probably horrible living conditions, they had a place to lay their head. Where are they now? They're in the middle of the desert, right? We hear wilderness, and we might think jungle, and there's a little bit of that, but really they're out in the desert at night. I was just watching a movie, and people are in the desert, and it's like that whole thing of, it's so hot during the day, but guess what? It's just so cold at night. So all these things, and the people grumble. That's really what we hear for those 40 years. The people are grumbling, and so it's a constant God saying to Moses, tell the people this. Moses tells the people. They're happy for a little bit, but then they fall away. They kind of fall away. Ugh, what are we doing? Why did we do this? And people are getting older, and this is 40 years. These are generations growing up in this, It's just a lot to really think about when you step back and do that. So, what did I even get into that for? Saying too much coffee. But I just talk about that because we get into this mindset of, where is God there with us? I'm trying to think. The gospel that's coming up is, Mark is talking, or in Mark, Jesus is just with the child among the disciples, and they're arguing, but what does Jesus do? Jesus is teaching a lesson. I had to look, actually, to remind myself what the gospel is about and how it connects. So, what we're going to hear is from the book of Numbers, right? And the people grumbling, and what are they doing? They're not letting God work. Oh, my goodness. How is that interwoven into our lives? We are not patient people. We may have already not been patient people, but then living in this social media driven, instantaneous world, especially as the generations get older, we are used to instant gratification. I'm not putting that on anyone. It's just we want these things to happen. I think what is the one thing that we can probably relate to when we text, right? When we grab and we text people and we're like, hey, this, and this. And we're expecting a response, but they don't respond. Why haven't they responded yet? I sent this a minute ago. Why haven't they responded? Instantaneous. That's what we're used to. I just think about all those conversations. There's someone on our staff who I'm constantly saying, what's the best way to get in touch with you quickly? And then your response, as long as, of course, you're not busy, because they work, just text me. They don't respond to my texts ever. Oh, did you see my text? Well, yeah. Respond to it. Oh, I didn't know you wanted a response. That's what the question mark was for, right? But it's that instant idea, but it's that looking for that patience, right? We have the people in Numbers, and I think, granted, 40 years wandering the wilderness when really they could have done it before. Instead of going like this, round and around in the desert, they could have just gone like this. You know, it would have been a lot shorter, but they didn't do it. Why? Because God was at work. Things were happening. God's time, our time, right? I don't know how else to say it. Secular time, church time, right? It's like we want these things to happen. Anyway, that is what is being addressed not only in Numbers, but we also get a piece of it as we're continuing to hear from James, but then into Mark, because the Gospel of Mark, because what does Jesus do? They're all arguing, right? Last week we heard about it. They're all arguing. Who's the greatest? What were we arguing about? Well, they're trying to figure things out. Well, how do we get to the kingdom? And, how do we get these gifts? And really, that kind of in between. And how do we get them now? How do we experience them right now? Because we want, it's kind of again that looking for the ease of life now. God's time isn't our time. We hear it. We may say we accept it, but sometimes it's difficult, right? So anyway, all of this, and then this week Jesus is saying, they're like, well, someone else is doing this, and, we're great, but they're not going to be as great as us. And I'm sure Jesus just looks at him and thinks, come on, man. Come on, bros. Come on, disciples. Because it's not just them, right? It's everyone. Come on. No. Listen to this. And then he goes and he tells a story. The subheading in some of these things. Don't try to stop God, right? Don't get in God's way. Let God work. So anyway, long introduction. I apologize for that. But here we are. God pause for today. Numbers 11. And we get a little chunks of verses. 11, 4 through 6, 10 through 16, 24 through 29. The rabble among them had a strong craving, and the Israelites also wept again and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt for nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at. So they're complaining, right? They're thinking about all the good foods, right? But now what do they have? They only have this bread from heaven. But perhaps even that is getting stale. Okay. Then Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, all at the entrances of their tents. Then the Lord became very angry, and Moses was displeased. This is a constant. So Moses said to the Lord, why have you treated your servant so badly? Why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Yeah. Just dealing with people, right? That's what Moses is saying here. Why did you do this? Why? What is this calling about? Are you sure? I don't know about you. I connect with that. Not necessarily people, but every once in a while, that's my prayer. Is this like, Lord, are you sure? Are you sure? That's my prayer. Okay, so Moses says this. You lay the burden of all these people on me. Did I conceive all this people? Did I give birth to them that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, as a nurse carries a suckling child, to the land that you promised an oath to their ancestors? Where am I to get meat to give to all these people? For they come weeping to me and say, give us meat to eat. I am not able to carry all this people alone, for they are too heavy for me. If this is the way you are going to treat me, put me to death at once. If I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my misery. So the Lord said to Moses, gather for me 70 of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be elders of the people and officers over them. Bring them to the tent of meeting, and have them take their place there with you. So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord, and he gathered 70 elders of the people and placed them all around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, and took some of the Spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied. But they did not do so again. 2 men remained in the camp, one named Eldad and the other named Medad. Medad. And the Spirit rested on them. They were among those registered, but they had not gone out to the tent. And so they prophesied in the camp. And a young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua, son of Nun, the assistant of Moses, one of his chosen men, said, My lord Moses, stop them. But Moses said to him, Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit upon them? So here's also a connection, because right in the gospel, they're wondering who is the greatest and who is all of this, and they're with Jesus, and then immediately they hear or they go to Jesus and say, well, you know, this person, this guy or whomever over there is talking in your name and healing and prophesying the gospel, but he's not one of us. But what does Jesus say to them? If they are with us, then how can we stand against them, right? I don't exactly. If they are for us, then remember they are not against us, right? It is that calling, it is that spread. It is those that come and they hear Jesus and they go and say, these are the wonderful things that are doing, and in God's name, I feel called as well. It's this spreading, even while Jesus is around, of the message. It is discipleship. You have the core group, but now that core group is growing, and that group doesn't like it. Already there's tensions in the church. But here is this connection, as I said in my sermon this last week. The 70 were there, but these 2 others, right? Spirit rested upon them, but they did not do so again. Oh, yeah. 2 men remained in the camp, one Eldad, the other named, and the Spirit rested on them. They were among those registered, but they had not gone out to the tent. So they were leaders, right? But they're in the camp, and they heard this, and they're like, yeah, you know, this is what's going on. Let's not forget this. And it kind of, I want to say snowballed, but there's no snow, so sandballed? I don't know. But how do we welcome others, and how do we listen to others when really we are the one? How are we the one body, right? This is the underlying question. How do we remain the one body when some part of that body may be a little bit different? It's kind of that thing that what comes to mind for me is a win for the kingdom is a win for the kingdom. Is it all about how many people are at resurrection on a Sunday? Or is it about how many people are here, but also there and there and there? Not only in the ELCA or the UCC, but other churches, right? Other worshiping communities. How are we all functioning together, knowing that at the core, at the center, is Christ and the gospel? Now, of course, we're not going to get into they interpreted it this way and they interpreted it this way. That's for God to talk about. That's for God to decide, right? But we can work with one another still. Are there ways to put things aside, knowing that at the core, we're all seeking the same thing? That's hard to do and take out things like, oh, you know, the negative part of judgment, right? Or, well, I don't agree with that, and this is how, all this interpretation. Here is God. Now, how do we orbit round, right? Perhaps that's what our devotional writer will get into. I don't know this person. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. Our devotional writer writes this. I know this is all kind of a lot. What a great passage to begin our devotions this week as we talk about living in community. Yes, what does it mean to live in community? That's what I was getting at. The burden is too great for Moses having to listen to the people complain about only having manna, right? Death would seem preferable to the current situation. I'd rather have bread than death, but that's just me. God listens and tells him to gather 70 elders. God took some of Moses' spirit, gave it to the elders, and they prophesied. How can laypersons share in lightening the load of congregational leaders and pastors? If a pastor, this doesn't make sense. I think it's, if you're a pastor, have you asked your parish for assistance when you need it? There's some words missing. If you're a pastor, have you asked your parish for assistance when you need it? And then there's a little ad here for the Moses Project, which is a way to help rural pastors connect with larger other pastors. Technology, right? We can be in the middle of nowhere and talk to someone in the middle of nowhere as if we're friends. Oh my gosh, just like worshiping online or something like that. This is an Iowa project and is designed to help pastors build relationships with others and learn from experienced clergy who are there to guide them through challenges at critical transitional phases in their ministerial career. So this kind of devotion kind of turned into an ad. I didn't read ahead, as I usually don't. But it's this idea, so how do we live in community and in our world? How do we seek and are we able to do that? For myself, 20 years ago, if it was available to Zoom someone from the small church I was in, right on the line of our conference, I could see it from my desk. And so 70 miles this way was the closest ELCA church. Or I could go 80 miles this way, and that was the closest ELCA church. Still, of course, trying to work with the other churches in the area. Some of them didn't want to have anything to do with me, but whatever, I still tried. But how do I connect with them without driving there at the time? I couldn't. I could call them, and that's okay, but that face-to-face, or even face-to-face this way, being able to see each other, wasn't there. It wasn't available. I know probably in 5 years everyone will be like, oh no, that was available 20 years ago. But that's where I was. And there are so many things that just weren't there. You know, I'm part of some social media groups that are just called Things They Didn't Teach You in Seminary, which is about 95% of what we do as ministers. How do we live in community that way? But then also, how do we live in community with those whom we serve? I touched on that a little bit in my sermon this last week. How do we live in community with those that we serve, even when we differ? I mean, it's easy to find similarities, but then when you have those differences, those are the things we don't want to talk about, right? But again, does that mean we exclude, or do we pick and choose what are earthly matters and really focus and be centered on the heavenly things? We are the one body. Sometimes we might be the pimple on the cheek, not these. Sometimes we might be the eyes, right, seeing things, and those things change. I think it's a bit of a powerful, I'll say, revelation to realize that, we're not always the arm of the one body. Sometimes we're the rear. Sometimes we're that little part in the back that that hurts, right? How do we take care of one another, though, as the body, as community, the best way that we can, so that there isn't those pains and sufferings, even when that's things that we cause, and even, how do we help one another? That's really where we're at. Those are the things we're thinking about in this season of Pentecost. The beginning of Pentecost, you've heard the word, you know it, now you go out and teach it, but there's also that message of But there's going to be things that come up. So how do we deal with that? Someone's going to see this and think it means this. Others are going to see this and it means this. So how do we weave ourselves together and stay strong? I know I've kind of said that about 8 or 9 different ways, but that's really the question, and that's where we're at. Because soon enough, we are born anew with Christ, right? In Advent, and preparing to welcome Christ with us once again. It's an interesting cycle when you just stop to think about it. Because here we are looking to be the disciples, and then we realize God's in his glory. Christ is the King. This is wonderful. And boom. Now we're waiting again. It's a rebirth for us. So again, this week, a lot of things jumbled together. But the question, the very basic question, how are we living in community? And oh my goodness, I can't deny, how do we live in community when we differ on things? Life, politics, all those things. How do we remember and put God first and keep God at the center? So, good. Let's close in prayer. Dear God, thank you for the blessing and challenge of living in Christian community. Man, what a line. May the Holy Spirit descend upon us so that we may serve in the best way possible and to keep you as our center. Amen. So again, another long one. This is going to be over 22 minutes. Until next week, God bless.